Right now, light, heat, and roads have been destroyed. Chaos on an all-Russian scale. An apocalypse has descended upon Putin's pseudo-empire. Russia is breaking under the ice. The country is being consumed by a frozen hell in the stupidity of its authorities. People are on the brink of survival. Shock! A terrible massacre has taken place inside the Russian Federation. Russia is going insane. Hatred has spilled out onto the streets. From words to knives. Migrants are being hunted. The Kremlin is fanning the flames. Violence has become the new norm. The Kremlin is unleashing a wave of crackdowns. Sensation! A new military alliance? Europe is ready to survive without the USA. An alternative military bloc is being born, and Ukraine will be at the center of the new alliance. Russia has no chances left. Trump's hysteria over Greenland triggered a domino effect. A new security architecture. Kyiv is taking on a key role. The Ukrainian armed forces' revenge is blowing up Russia. This is a terrible reckoning. Shock! Russian air defense is striking its own homes. The Kremlin is in shock. Defense turns into a killer. Putin's missiles are flying into Russian residential neighborhoods. Don't miss the fiery details. Sensation! Beijing is turning away from Russia. The eternal friendship has cracked. A deadly blow is hitting the Russian economy. Moscow is no longer trusted. America's secret deals are coming to the forefront. Russia is losing its last major ally forever. Wow, $800 billion for Ukraine's future. The Kremlin is in a pack. The peace plan is gaining momentum. The final word belongs to Badenov. The stakes have reached their peak. No one expected this. All this and more in our program Hotspot. Apocalypse in Russia? Russia's sinking under the ice. Chaos is engulfing all regions. Massive car accidents, blocked federal highways, airport gridlock, power and heating outages. The country's coming apart at the seams due to raging natural disasters. And not only that, top regional management is making a shocking statement. The absurdity is off the charts. All the details of this weather and management Armageddon are coming up in the report.
A snowfall that Moscow hasn't seen in the middle of winter for the past 56 years.
A snowfall.
Kamchatka also saw a snowfall that broke a 30-year record. At the beginning of January, let me remind you, several regions of Russia were literally paralyzed by the powerful cyclone Francie, which resulted in airport delays, traffic accidents, closed federal highways, and problems with heating and electricity.
The whole city is freezing. It's already the third day without heating, electricity, or water. They were shut off back on December 31st. At least we have a pool where we can collect water, but everyone else is melting snow. The state of emergency was only declared on the second day, but no one tells us anything. We aren't being informed in any way. The emergency services aren't telling us anything. They just say, we don't know, wait.
It is also reported that problems with electricity and heating in several southern regions of Russia will persist for several weeks.
The situation in Krasnodar Krai, the Republic of Adygea, as well as in neighboring regions, may remain difficult for the next 2 weeks. This is according to our sources in the Ministry of Emergency Situations. The interlocutors note that the situation has worsened due to deteriorating weather conditions. At the same time, in some places, the infrastructure is worn out. Sources also mention that emergency services are unable to quickly cope with the disaster because of the large amount of snow.
But after the snow cyclone, severe frosts are heading for Russia.
According to preliminary estimates, on January 19th, as expected under clear anticyclonic weather, real epiphany frosts will hit in the early morning, dropping to -20, -25 degrees. But on the nights of January 20th and 21st, the cold will intensify to -25, -30, and during the day to -12 to 17, which is 15 degrees below the climate norm. These abnormal frosts could last for almost a week, and of course, the forecasts will still be updated.
In addition, meteorologists report that abnormal frosts down to -36 degrees are approaching central Russia. And while Russians are struggling with the bad weather, certain government officials are coming up with conspiratorial nonsense, claiming that the weather could be the result of climate weapons being used against Russia.
Obviously, such a large amount of precipitation can't just fall all at once for no reason. This was done to divert our resources to deal with the aftermath of the bad weather, our source says. It should be noted that this was not the only source to say so.
Meanwhile, Moscow Mayor Sergei Sobyanin, in connection with the abnormal frosts, demanded better protection for Moscow.
Sergei Semenovich requested additional air defense systems from the military to protect the capital. They promised to take care of everything. These are very difficult times. We hope everything will be all right, commented a source close to the Moscow mayor.
As we can see, the temperature in the halls of power and in the kitchens of ordinary Russians remains consistently different. But now, it's not just a metaphor about the gulf between the people and the authorities. It's quite literal. The temperature in the office of someone like Sobyanin and that of an ordinary Russian is actually different.
Shock. Russia is being swept by a wave of chauvinism, with intolerance and anger reaching unprecedented levels. Ordinary Russians are moving from hate speech to violence against migrants. Meanwhile, Kremlin propaganda is already laying the groundwork for violence against Russia's Caucasian and Asian neighbors. As the saying goes, a fish rots from the head down.
Russia for Russians, for Russian unity. Not so long ago, the Russian authorities persecuted and even imprisoned people for such slogans. Now, however, the authorities themselves have adopted them in a new campaign against migrants.
I love Russia and all its people, all its nations. I will no longer hide the local population.
The Russian authorities are beginning to discriminate against their own citizens based on their origin, and these citizens are entering into open conflicts with Russians. Recently, a bloody conflict broke out in the Moscow region after a woman was insulted on a bus. A native of Tajikistan got into a conflict with a group of young men who were insulting her. They got off at a bus stop and started fighting. At some point, the guy pulled out a knife and delivered several blows, which turned out to be fatal. As it turned out, the person who was killed was a member of a far-right group. In St. Petersburg, security guards at a local shopping center killed a young man because they thought he had stolen something. First, they knocked him out, and then they strangled him. In Odinsovo, people from Azerbaijan attacked and beat up activists from the Healthy Fatherland movement. The Kremlin.
After a long and exhaustive search, the team has finally successfully found exactly what they were looking for in the first place.
Wait. How to get rid of migrants from Central Asia and replace them with Indians? Some of them were forcibly sent to the front, threatened with deportation. Some wanted to earn money this way.
They're handing out draft notices to the guys.
Right out in the open air like this.
It's just complete lawlessness.
They have no legal protection, and in fact are facing an even more aggressive form of forced mobilization than ordinary Russians. In the war against Ukraine, it is most often people from Russia's poorest regions who die, with Dagestan and Buryatia leading the statistics. They're dying for Putin's imperial ambitions, as he blames the West for all sins. And so, Yarrow wants to unite all the countries that were formerly part of the USSR. If previously Moscow's aggression was directed toward the West and Ukraine, now it is openly spreading across the post-Soviet space.
The key objective is to improve prosperity and quality of life of the citizens of our state.
Putin's puppets can't keep their mouths shut and keep getting caught up in new scandals.
Countries that have become satellites themselves. This is what this collective West gone mad with liberal fascism is like. Just look at what's happening there.
Propagandist Solovyev called for a revision of Russia's national doctrine and for another special military operation. But now in Armenia and in other places, as he puts it, in Russia's spheres of influence. By the way, this happened after Solovyev received an award from Putin.
They don't care about international law or the international order. If for our national security it was necessary to start a special military operation on the territory of Ukraine, then why, based on the same reasoning, can't we start a special military operation elsewhere? In points within our sphere of influence.
And this is despite the fact that Armenia is still an ally of Russia and in the CSTSO, a country that for a long time relied on Russia for its security, but step by step is choosing Europe. The Kremlin doesn't like this, which is why the ideology of intimidation is also promoted by other Kremlin talking heads.
It is unacceptable to agree to the existence of a sovereign Armenia or a sovereign Georgia, a sovereign Azerbaijan, a sovereign Kazakhstan, a sovereign Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan. Nothing sovereign can exist in this new model.
The Armenian Foreign Ministry delivered a note of protest to the Russian ambassador.
It was emphasized that this is an unacceptable infringement on the sovereignty of the Republic of Armenia and a gross violation of the fundamental principles of friendly relations between Armenia and Russia.
Hand-delivering a written message is an incredibly significant and serious undertaking. Even if we look at it from a historical perspective. From a historical perspective, such things have happened extremely rarely.
The country's officials couldn't hold back and gave a tough response to people like Solovyov.
Listen, what difference does it make? These propagandists, there's a very good expression in Russian, but I don't want to say that here. To me, they're both crap on a spittock. To me, there's no difference between them.
In the countries of Central Asia, local politicians also did not ignore Solovyov's words and responded to them very harshly.
Oh, I like how this hysteria has started.
Under Putin, Russia lives without morals. Many jingoistic patriots, Z-bloggers, neo-Nazis, war correspondents, and other media personalities have jumped on the military bandwagon, making chauvinistic and xenophobic statements commonplace. This situation serves as a powerful and sobering reminder that once again proves that Vladimir Putin's ongoing invasion of the sovereign nation of Ukraine has effectively normalized an alarmingly high level of cruelty and systemic aggression within the borders of Russia. This conflict has not only devastated the Ukrainian people, but has also fundamentally altered the social and moral landscape of Russian society, fostering an environment where violence is increasingly accepted as a standard tool of state policy and personal conduct. The ripple effects of this military campaign continue to manifest on the daily lives of citizens, reinforcing a culture of hostility that was previously unseen on such a widespread and institutionalized scale across the entire country.
At this very moment, please make sure that you carefully turn your head all the way to the right side and keep watching that specific area very closely for any changes.
At this very specific point in time, as we observe the situation currently unfolding right before our eyes, we must focus our entire attention on the immediate present and everything that is happening right here and now in this exact moment of our lives.
It became the last straw for the EU's patience. This was reported by the American publication Politico.
But for many European governments, including America's oldest and most loyal allies, Trump's threat to impose punitive tariffs on anyone who tries to prevent him from seizing Greenland became the last straw. They believe that now a breakup is inevitable. In frequent conversations, concerned European officials called Trump's successful decision to annex the sovereign Danish territory madness and delusion. Politics.
It seems that Europe is ready to create a new alliance instead of NATO, without the US, but with Ukraine. Ukraine could play a crucial role in this defense alliance due to the size of its territory, its geographic location, its defense industry, and the fact that it is already at war and has invaluable experience.
Ukraine will be key to Europe's defense, primarily because of its technological base, particularly its well-established production of top-class drones, and the fact that it has the largest army in Europe. Draj Mason, military analyst.
4. The United Kingdom, France, the Scandinavian countries, the Baltics, Poland, Germany, Italy. For most of Trump's second term, they worked within an effective group without America, the so-called coalition of the willing. And it could become the beginning of a defense alliance between Ukraine and Europe.
The coalition of the willing initially focused on issues concerning Ukraine. It created very close ties between some key people in the capitals. They strengthened trust and the ability to cooperate. They know each other by name. It's easy for them to get in touch and send messages. If you take into account the military power of Ukraine, as well as the power of France, Germany, Poland, and the United Kingdom, the potential armed strength of the coalition of the willing would be enormous. It would include both nuclear and non-nuclear states. Politics.
Right now, Europe is fully purchasing weapons for Ukraine from the US, and Ukraine in turn has the largest combat-ready army in Europe. Therefore, a new military alliance without the US is quite possible. And even after a possible peace agreement, it will not disappear.
Ukraine has friends who understand the nature of Russian aggression as a common problem. With them, we can try to create defensive alliances. Tactically, we can try to form regional unions. For example, the Baltic countries, Poland and others, a Central European state, and the United Kingdom. This will be a temporary and not very stable means of pursuing our strategic interests. But it is possible and necessary to look for options for other defense alliances. Anatoly Kruglashov, political scientist.
The question of the need for EU defense without US support has been discussed for a long time. In recent days, many initiatives and bold headlines have been coming out of Brussels, and a coalition of those willing to support Ukraine could be the beginning of a new defensive alliance. Officially, the EU has decided to ensure its own self-defense. By 2030, but under wartime conditions, this decision could be made much sooner.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Terrible revenge in the armed forces of Ukraine. The Kremlin did not expect this. Retaliation for strikes on Ukraine is gaining momentum. Since fiction. The Russian military is turning against the regime and has started destroying their own apartment buildings. While Russian generals report successful interceptions, Putin's missiles are directly hitting and destroying residential buildings. Russia's air defense collapsed overnight. Kremlin soldiers have turned into executioners of their own people. How did this happen and who will be held responsible? Find out in our investigation.
Russia is once again under fire from friendly drones. But there's a catch.
A missile just flew right past my face.
In this footage, you see a Russian air defense missile, which is supposed to protect people, but instead it hit a residential building in Krasnodar.
It looks like I won't be going to work for the next week or two.
Oddly enough, the official version is the arrival of Shahen, and the unofficial Russian air defense went over to the side of Ukraine.
Justice is the fundamental pursuit of moral rightness and legal fairness in society. It ensures every individual is treated with dignity and receives what they deserve, maintaining the ethical balance and integrity of our legal systems. The impact date is impressive. Moscow region, Kyiv, plus Belgorod. This is the clearest confirmation that the Russian air defense system is imperfect.
But unfortunately, or fortunately, it turns out that the Russians have even more to fear, not from attacks by Ukraine, but from their own unpredictable missiles.
To say that this is an accident is more a matter of practice for the Russian air defense system. This is far from an isolated incident. We can recall a similar situation when even a civilian Azerbaijani aircraft was shot down in the skies over the Russian Federation.
While some Russian missiles fall on their own homes, others, already strike missiles, are launched by Russia at Ukraine. One of the goals is to leave the country without electricity and heat, especially now in winter. But this is exactly where the boomerang starts to come back. The city of Oriol is under attack, its fuel and energy infrastructure targeted. And to top it off, there's no electricity for a complete immersion in the atmosphere. By the way, it's not just Oriol. Belgorod had its share of excitement too. Or more precisely, the Machurinskaya CHP plant. Ukraine is responding with strikes on Russian energy infrastructure, substations, thermal power plants, basically facilities that support the war effort.
A whole range of issues is addressed at the moment when the energy infrastructure on the territory of the occupying country is hit. This creates social tension, but first and foremost, it reduces the capabilities of the Russian military-industrial complex. In other words, it effectively halts Russian defense industry enterprises. And
even after all this, Russia continues to claim that everything is under control, without any details or explanations.
And accordingly, so that Russians don't start asking why this is happening, they try to minimize the negative informational background by issuing statements that everything is under control. In other words, they try to convey to the average Russian that there is a strict presidential, the established hierarchical chain of command, and accordingly, all strategic defensive countermeasures taken at the present moment to counter the forces of the Ukrainian side are having a demonstrably positive and constructive effect.
Sometimes it seems that it's not just Ukraine taking revenge on Russia anymore. Even an ordinary winter becomes a challenge that the system can't handle. Even on the 6th day in Kamchatka, the snow is still lying there, just as it was before. And it seems that the authorities have no time for this at all right now. Although maybe there's simply no one left to clean it up. After all, everyone was sent long ago to the so-called special military operation.
This is the second floor of the building. And those are the windows of the first floor. This is the ramp, the entrance.
Even a shopping mall in Novosibirsk couldn't withstand such disgrace. It literally collapsed under the weight of the smell. In Russia, any crisis, missiles, snow, power outages, ends the same way. The system isn't ready, but officially everything is under control. A country that has spent years preparing for war doesn't know how to live in peacetime. And sometimes Ukraine isn't even needed for this collapse to happen.
China's turning away from Russia. Beijing is believing Moscow less and less. Moreover, the bunker dweller is being blamed for losing Venezuela, and it's suspected that the Russian Federation might have secretly made a deal with the US. China is acting tough. The sensational reduction in purchases of Russian raw materials is hitting Putin's economy hard. Has the eternal friendship really started to crack? And is the strategic partnership coming to an end? Let's break down the story. A subject. That's exactly how the relationship between China and Russia has been described lately. And as you might have guessed, the power and authority are in Beijing's hands. Even though the Kremlin assures year after year that China is their brother, friend, and partner.
Our relationship is equal, mutually beneficial, and not opportunistic. The People's Republic of China, it is of an unprecedentedly high level. And it is based on mutual trust. China is our strategic partner and ally.
In reality, however, with each passing year, Russia increasingly resembles a vassal of China, a raw materials appendage, or a profitable asset, at least for now.
China has effectively made Russia its junior partner. And sometimes Russia even acts almost like a proxy for China. And this is something we also need to understand.
Another nail in the coffin of relations between the countries was Putin's silent acceptance of the fate of his Venezuelan partner, Nicolas Maduro.
We call on the American leadership to immediately release the legitimately elected president of the independent state and his spouse.
This, you could say, was Russia's only reaction to the events in Venezuela. But the absence of Moscow's usual tirade about how bad the West is not the only reason for China's doubts about Russia. As reported by The Times, Beijing has begun to question Russia's reliability as a partner, since it believes that Russia and the White House had some kind of agreement.
According to a source cited by the publication, the Russian authorities did not share their assessment of the situation in Venezuela with the Chinese. And by the decision to withdraw their diplomats and their families from Caracas at the end of December. As a result, China was caught off guard by the American Special Forces operation. All of this caused irritation in Beijing and sparked heated discussions about the relationship between China and Russia. In some circles, there was even speculation that the silence of Russian air defense systems in Venezuela during the American raid was not a coincidence, but evidence of cooperation between Moscow and Washington, writes The Times.
Now people are saying that Xi Jinping will never forgive Putin for losing Maduro, and therefore Venezuela as well, with all its resources.
There were economic calculations based on Venezuelan oil. China even built a huge oil refinery specifically designed for Venezuelan crude. There are differences there. And basically, that refinery can only process this type of oil. And it's known that Russia supplied its air defense systems to Venezuela. And after the fact, when the Americans carried out their special operation in Venezuela, it was captured, Maduro. And let's remember one more thing. That there were quite a lot of Russian mercenaries in Venezuela. There was even an entire Russian general who was training Venezuelans in the art of war.
But that's not the main reason for the cracks in Russia's relationship with its eastern neighbor. As they say in Beijing, Russia has seriously damaged China's relations with Europe.
Although Russia's isolation due to the war in Ukraine has brought China economic benefits, the costs of the two countries growing closer are also obvious. This was noted in an interview shortly before Maduro's seizure of power by Professor Jiaxing Guo. He is the former dean of the School of International Studies at Peking University and one of China's most influential strategists. Among such costs, he mentioned the deterioration of current and future relations with Europe, adding that resolving the conflict in Ukraine would be beneficial for China.
China is considering this option, despite the fact that it was the war that turned Russia into their vassal. At one time, China became something of a lifeline for sanctioned Russia, a partner, or rather a raw materials hypermarket, where everything is 50% off. Even within the Russian government, it has been said anonymously several times that China is simply using Russia, and that this is exploitation, not partnership.
Modern China is ruthlessly turning us into a raw materials colony. It is destroying our real sector with a flood of its own production, its own goods. We're just the source of raw materials, guys. It keeps us, wants to keep us, in a half-strangled state.
But today, that economic profit cannot make up for the damage that the friendship between the Russian Federation and China is causing to China.
China is starting to get not only benefits from this war, but also losses. Let's recall the issue with the military exercises in Belarus when there was a provocation. Russian drones against Poland. And Poland closed its border, while 10% of China's exports to Europe go through Belarus.
That's why it seems Beijing has started to distance itself from Moscow. In 5 years, trade between China and Russia has decreased.
From January to November, China reduced its purchases of Russian oil by 7.6% to 91.5 million tons. At the same time, in monetary terms, exports collapsed by 20% due to falling prices and discounts, according to experts from the Guider Institute, citing Chinese customs data. China's imports of petroleum products fell by 3% for light distillates and by 33% for heavy ones. At the same time, in monetary terms, deliveries plummeted by 33% and 40% respectively.
Oil trade is barely staying afloat, although even here things are unstable. China sometimes reduces oil imports from Russia and sometimes increases them. The only thing keeping China's interest is the record low price offered by Russia.
It sells. It sells oil to China and India and sells it at a significant discount. According to the latest data, the actual price of Russian oil in China reaches as low as $36 per barrel. And at some oil fields, that's even below production cost. And in this way, China's actually profiting from its ally.
Another blow to Putin was China's refusal to buy Russian electricity. Kommersant reports that imports of electricity from Russia have been completely halted, despite the contract. And that's all because energy from Russia has become too expensive for China. There are zero benefits from the contract. Moreover, China reacted very calmly to the alleged drone attack by the Ukrainian armed forces on Putin's residence. And that's because they simply don't care at all. China's also not maintaining particularly partner-like relations with Russia in the Central Asian countries. Beijing has long set its sights on what Russia considers its spheres of influence and is actively deepening its ties with the countries of Central Asia.
In the eyes of the Central Asian countries, Russia is an unreliable partner. And indeed, China is becoming increasingly active in its expansion. You know, in Russia, they like to call this region Russia's soft underbelly. Recently, China has been making significant inroads there, especially in Kazakhstan. And what's important and interesting is that after the start of the large-scale invasion, Xi Jinping paid a visit to Kazakhstan, where the joint declaration following the visit resembled more of a warning to Russia regarding any potential expansionist plans. As in, Kazakhstan's national security is China's national security, and so on.
The Kremlin doesn't have the strength to compete with China, so Putin even swallowed the fact that after 27 years of discussions, China, together with Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan, is building a railway to Europe, bypassing Russia. But it's not just about economic and strategic interests. After all, China has also set its sights on Russian territory, specifically the resource-rich Far Eastern region. But in exchange for perks from China, Putin is even willing to swallow this. This is also confirmed by the fact that Russia practically gifted Xi Jinping 2 islands a couple of years ago, and now it has allowed large-scale deforestation around Lake Baikal. That's why today, China is effectively absorbing sanction-stricken Russia, which has long since become nothing more than an asset for Beijing, an asset that Xi Jinping uses as leverage in negotiations with Europe. But as soon as it becomes unprofitable for China, the geopolitical game with Russia will be over.
Ukraine continues to fight and receive support. A just peace is not far off. Plus $800 billion for the reconstruction of the country. The Kremlin is simply in hysterics. The negotiation team is being strengthened by the former head of Ukrainian intelligence, Kirill Budanov. So how many steps are there from a ceasefire to peace? And will this peace be just for Ukraine? Watch.
Right now, this is developing. After all, multiple anonymous sources reporting from the Telegraph claim that officials in Kyiv and Washington are actively preparing to soon sign a comprehensive prosperity agreement, specifically designed for Ukraine's long-term post-war economic recovery and reconstruction. We're talking about attracting $800 billion for the reconstruction of Ukraine over the course of 10 years.
We know that out of these $800 billion, at least $200 billion are Russian assets located directly in Europe. Of that amount, up to $400 billion are pledged to be raised by BlackRock. These are already private direct investments, which is a clear signal that Ukraine will not only survive, but will become a place for business development.
This could happen already during the upcoming meeting of world leaders. But if this point is more related to the post-war period, then what is happening in the negotiation process right now? Not long ago, the renewed Ukrainian negotiation team visited Miami, where they met with the American side. The Ukrainian representatives were Rustem Umerov, Kirill Budanov, and David Arakamya. On the American side, the consultations included Stephen Witkoff, Jared Kushner, Army Secretary Sham Daniel Driscoll, and White House staffer Josh Gruenbaum.
They discussed in detail economic development and the prosperity plan, as well as security guarantees for Ukraine, focusing on practical mechanisms for their implementation and enforcement.
According to National Security and Defense Council Secretary Rustem Umerov, Ukraine informed its American partners about the recent attacks by the Russian Federation on Ukraine's energy infrastructure. They also agreed to continue working at the team level during the next round of consultations in Davos. President Volodymyr Zelensky also previously stated that Kyiv and Washington have worked productively on the issue of achieving peace. But there are issues on which the parties are not on the same page. He also emphasized that Ukraine must be certain that the war will not resume again just a month, 2 or 3 months later, or after the end of the U.S. President Donald Trump's term.
As for security guarantees, while the American side is proposing 15 years, the Ukrainian side insists on the necessity of a longer period. 30 years, 40 years, 50 years. In other words, a much longer-term perspective.
But here, it's also important to note another very significant point. Kirill Budanov joined the negotiation team. The day before, he had been appointed head of the president's office. This significantly strengthens the negotiation process with Washington regarding security guarantees and the reconstruction of Ukraine.
The representatives from the American side have officially and directly introduced an additional high-level person who had direct personal contact with Budanov. This individual is Mr. Driscoll, who can be considered a significant and integral member of this specific operational group, the so-called VENSA group. And this is actually a new development in the negotiation track. Kyrilo Budanov, the head of Ukrainian intelligence, is a highly seasoned professional with many years of extensive experience collaborating and sharing strategic information with various Western intelligence agencies. This includes working closely with the Central Intelligence Agency in the United States and the Secret Intelligence Service, commonly known as MI6 in the United Kingdom. A significant and diverse range of contacts have also been successfully and formally established, directly and strategically, within various political circles. But we should also remember that Budanov is someone who has communicated directly with Russian intelligence.
Budanov can use his intelligence experience to establish a more trusting dialogue with the American side, including key figures from Donald Trump's team, such as Jared Kushner.
This is currently Budanov's primary and most significant objective in this specific operational track. The main goal is still to use additional channels of communication in order to directly promote Ukrainian national interests. This matter specifically concerns the process of ending the war and the essential strategic parameters that must definitely be implemented and fully activated in this regard. And as for the comprehensive legal and regulatory framework itself, which has been developed for the post-war period, and of course, when it comes to defending the fundamental interests of our state.
In addition, Budanov has already had working contacts with Russians regarding prisoner exchanges and has participated in diplomatic processes. And his experience in the intelligence services allows him to speak the same language as the American military and intelligence community.
That's all for now. Watch more hot news in the next episode.